"This is my ranch," the cowboy said, until the Apache woman told him, "I want you too." The sun had barely risen over the open valley when Jake rode his old horse, Dusty, along the edge of his ranch. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of dry grass and earth. Jake had spent his life here, working the land, tending the cattle, and keeping the fences in shape. To him, the ranch wasn't just a piece of property. It was a life, a routine, and a refuge. He valued solitude. People often said he was tough, even stubborn, and maybe they were right. Jake liked things simple: the land, the animals, and his quiet days. He didn't need company, and he certainly didn't like outsiders wandering near his property. On this particular morning, Jake was checking the northern fence line when he noticed a woman standing at the edge of the trail leading up to his ranch. She wasn't threatening. She simply stood there, looking at the fields and the distant hills. She was striking in appearance, strong, confident, and carrying herself with a quiet dignity. Jake's first instinct was to keep riding, to avoid any conversation, but curiosity got the better of him. He guided Dusty slowly toward her, keeping his voice steady but firm. "This is private property," he said, tipping his hat. "You can't just stand here." The woman looked at him with eyes that seemed to hold both warmth and determination. "I'm sorry," she said calmly, her voice carrying a melodic tone. "I didn't mean to intrude. I'm just passing through, and I wanted to see the land. It's beautiful." Jake narrowed his eyes. He wasn't used to people talking to him like this. Most strangers either apologized quickly or turned away when he looked sternly at them. But there was something different about her. She didn't seem afraid or intimidated, and that alone made Jake slightly uneasy. "I said this is my ranch," he repeated, his voice firmer this time. "I don't like strangers wandering around." The woman smiled faintly, not mocking, just confident. "I understand. But sometimes people don't see what's right in front of them until they take a moment to look. That's all I wanted, to see it. I wasn't planning to cause any trouble." Jake blinked. Her words weren't demanding, but they carried a quiet strength. He didn't know why, but a small part of him felt drawn to her honesty. He had spent years keeping everyone at a distance. Trust wasn't easy for him, and letting someone into his world was something he never considered. And yet, here was a stranger who seemed unafraid of him or the silence he protected. He gestured toward the trail. "Well, you shouldn't be here, but you can look from the road." "That's as close as I allow." The woman nodded. She didn't argue or try to push boundaries. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, examining the rolling hills and the wide-open fields. "It's magnificent," she said softly. "I've seen a lot of places, but this, it has a feeling I can't describe. Strong, alive, and quiet all at once." Jake felt a strange sense of pride. That land had been in his family for years, and he had fought hard to keep it going. Hearing someone else appreciate it, even a stranger, brought a small smile to his face, but he quickly masked it. "It's just land," he said gruffly. "Nothing special, just hard work." The woman laughed lightly, a sound that blended with the morning breeze. "Sometimes hard work is what makes something special," she said. "It's what gives it life." Jake's jaw tightened. Her words weren't flattery. They were honest, and for some reason they resonated with him. He wasn't used to people understanding the value he placed on the ranch, and certainly not strangers. There was a pause between them, a quiet moment where the wind carried the scent of the earth and the distant sound of cattle grazing. Finally, he said, "I don't usually talk to strangers, don't take it personally." "I don't," she replied, her voice calm and steady. I like seeing people who care about what they do. You care about this land and it shows. That's all I wanted to say." Jake studied her for a moment. She had a presence that was hard to ignore. Her confidence didn't feel threatening, but instead, it seemed to challenge him in a way he didn't fully understand. Normally, he would have turned Dusty around and left, but something about her made him hesitate. The woman glanced at the horse. "He's beautiful," she said. "Looks like he's well taken care of." Jake's lips twitched into what almost felt like a smile. "He's my partner," he said simply. "Been with me for years. I trust him with my life." "I can see that," she said, looking at Dusty with admiration. "It takes patience and care to build a bond like that." Jake looked away, focusing on the fence line, trying to hide the warmth her words sparked inside him. He wasn't used to compliments, especially from someone he barely knew. There was an ease about her, an openness, that made him think differently. For a moment he considered inviting her in, letting her see the ranch closer, but he quickly shook the thought away. He didn't do that. He didn't let people into his life easily. After a few more minutes of quiet conversation, the woman straightened and prepared to leave. "Thank you for letting me see it," she said. "I'll stay off your land, I promise." Jake tipped his hat, unsure of what to say. "Be careful on the road," he said finally. She smiled again, a small, genuine smile that lingered. "I will," she said, and with that she walked away, leaving Jake standing there, looking after her as she disappeared down the trail. As he guided Dusty back toward the barn, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something about this encounter mattered more than he wanted to admit. He had lived his life in routines, keeping people at a distance, but her presence had stirred something unfamiliar. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a sense of connection he hadn't felt in years, and that unsettled him more than he wanted to acknowledge. For the rest of the morning, Jake went about his work, fixing fences, checking the cattle, and preparing for the day. But his mind kept drifting back to her words, her calm confidence, and the way she had respected his boundaries while still making her presence felt. He couldn't explain why, but he found himself thinking about her smile, the way she had looked at Dusty, and the quiet way she had spoken about the land. By midday, Jake realized that he wanted to see her again, not because he felt lonely, but because her presence had a clarity and warmth he hadn't experienced in a long time. She wasn't like the other people who had wandered near his ranch. She didn't demand, complain, or try to impress him. She simply was, and that simplicity fascinated him. As the sun climbed higher, Jake finished his chores and sat on the porch of his small cabin. Dusty rested nearby, chewing on the dry grass. Jake leaned back, hat tilted over his eyes, and thought about the woman who had dared to walk near his ranch and speak her mind. He knew, in some quiet corner of his mind, that this encounter was the beginning of something he hadn't anticipated. Something that might challenge his solitude, his way of life, and perhaps even his heart. And for the first time in a long while, Jake didn't mind the idea. The next morning, Jake woke up earlier than usual. The memory of the previous day's encounter lingered in his mind. He tried to push it aside, focusing on the chores that awaited him, but no matter what he did, the thought of the woman at the edge of his ranch kept returning. There was something about her calm confidence, her warm yet firm voice, that made him feel unexpectedly unsettled. He had spent years relying only on himself, avoiding distractions, and yet here was someone who had made him feel curiosity and something else. Meanwhile, Maria had returned to the area for her own reasons. She had work in the nearby town and family matters to attend to, but she found herself drawn back toward the ranch. She remembered the quiet strength in the man who had spoken to her yesterday, the way he cared for his land and his horse, and the subtle warmth she had seen beneath his cautious exterior. She wanted to see him again, not because she expected anything, but because she felt there was more to discover. As she approached the ranch, she saw Jake already working in the fields. He was fixing a gate, moving with precise, practiced motions, completely absorbed in his work. She waited for a moment, letting him notice her presence. When he finally looked up, his eyes narrowed slightly and he straightened. "You're back," he said, his voice low but not unfriendly. "I am," Maria replied with a small smile. "I had some business nearby. I thought I'd stop by and see how you and Dusty are doing." Jake grunted, unsure of how to respond. Part of him wanted to brush her off, remind her again that this was his property and that he didn't welcome visitors. But another part, the part he didn't like to admit, was quietly glad to see her. Well, don't get too close, he said finally, though his tone lacked its usual sharpness. You know the rules. I remember, Maria said, laughing softly. I'm careful. I wouldn't want to trouble you. Jake gave a short nod and returned to his work, but she didn't leave. Instead, she walked along the edge of the field, quietly observing how he worked. She noticed the care with which he handled the cattle, the way he guided Dusty without harsh words, and the respect he gave the land with each step he took. You really know your land, she said, breaking the silence. It's clear you care about every inch of it. Jake paused for a moment, wiping sweat from his forehead. It's not just land, he said. It's my life. Been in my family for years. Hard work every day. Nothing comes easy. Maria nodded, understanding. I can see that. You put your heart into it. That's rare these days. Her words felt different from the usual compliments he received. They weren't empty flattery. They were genuine observations, and he felt a small warmth at hearing them. He looked at her, really looked at her, and noticed how her eyes seemed to notice everything, every detail, every movement. There was a quiet intelligence there, a strength and a kindness that made him uneasy and intrigued at the same time. For a while they worked in companionable silence. Maria offered to help with minor tasks, feeding some of the animals, moving supplies, or checking fences. Jake was hesitant at first, but he allowed her to assist. She was careful and skilled, and her presence made the work easier without making him feel helpless or crowded. As they worked together, conversation naturally flowed. Maria shared stories of her childhood and her connection to her Apache heritage. She spoke about the importance of family, respect for the land, and traditions that had been passed down through generations. She spoke with pride and reverence, and Jake listened, fascinated. He had never met anyone who spoke so openly about their heritage without bitterness or complaint. There was a sense of balance in her words, a deep understanding of where she came from and who she was. Jake found himself opening up more than he expected. He told her about the ranch, the challenges of keeping it running, and the solitude he had chosen for so long. He talked about the long hours, the responsibility, and the moments of quiet satisfaction when things went right. Maria listened intently, never interrupting, her eyes attentive and encouraging. You've built something special here, she said quietly. It's more than just a ranch. It's alive because of you. Jake felt a strange mix of pride and embarrassment. He wasn't used to praise, especially not from someone he barely knew. It's just work, he muttered. Anyone could do it. Not like you, she said gently. Not anyone could care like you do. That takes more than work. That takes heart. He looked away, focusing on a stubborn fence post he needed to fix. Her words had reached him more than he wanted to admit. He wasn't used to people seeing the effort, the care, or the quiet love he had poured into his life. By late morning, they had accomplished quite a bit together. The gate was repaired, the cattle were accounted for, and Dusty seemed to enjoy Maria's gentle guidance. She even managed to make the work fun, joking lightly with Jake, teasing him about his stubbornness, and making him laugh more than he had in months. You don't laugh enough, she said as they paused to catch their breath. You need to smile more, Cowboy. Jake shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I smile enough, he said, though his tone was softer than usual. Maria laughed again, the sound warm and infectious. It made Jake realize that her presence brought lightness to the day, a contrast to the hard, steady rhythm he had grown accustomed to. He felt a pull he hadn't felt in years, a mix of admiration, curiosity, and something deeper he didn't fully understand yet. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, they took a break under the shade of a large oak tree. Dusty grazed nearby while they sat on a fallen log. Maria offered Jake some water from her bottle, and he accepted, noticing the care in her gesture. It was a simple act, but it spoke volumes about her thoughtfulness and her attention to the small things. You make it look easy, Maria said, watching him sip the water. All this work all day, you handle it like it's nothing. Jake shrugged. "It's just life," he said. "You do what you have to, nothing special about that." Maria tilted her head, studying him. "I think it's special. The way you care, the way you handle things, it's rare. Most people take life for granted or complain about every little thing. You don't." He felt a lump in his throat, not used to such honest observation. It wasn't flattery, it was understanding. And that understanding, coming from her, made him realize how much he valued her perspective. After a moment of quiet, she added softly, "I like seeing people who care. People who put their heart into what they do. It's inspiring." Jake looked at her, surprised by the weight of her words. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just nodded, letting the silence speak. There was a comfort in her presence, a feeling that he didn't need to be on guard for once. As the day went on, Maria helped Jake with smaller tasks, always careful not to overstep, always respectful of his space. But the subtle connection between them grew stronger with every passing hour. They shared stories, laughed at small mishaps, and supported each other through the work. Jake realized he had never felt this easy with someone before. He didn't need to pretend, didn't need to hide, and yet he felt challenged and intrigued in ways he hadn't expected. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they had finished most of the day's work. Dusty was tired but happy, the cattle were secure and the ranch looked well tended. Jake and Maria stood side by side, watching the sun cast long shadows across the fields. "You know," Maria said quietly, "this place, it's more than just land. It feels alive. And you make it that way." Jake turned to her, meeting her gaze. He felt a strange warmth, a connection that went beyond words. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he wanted her around, wanted to see more of her, and wanted to understand the spark she had ignited in him. For her part, Maria smiled softly, feeling the same pull. She didn't need to say more. The quiet understanding between them was enough. Both knew that this was the beginning of something significant, something neither had anticipated, but both were curious to explore. As she finally prepared to leave for the day, Maria glanced back at Jake. "Thank you for letting me stay and help," she said. "I'll be back soon." Jake tipped his hat, his heart a little lighter than it had been in years. "I'll hold you to that," he said, his voice carrying a mix of humor and sincerity. And with that, Maria walked down the trail, leaving Jake to watch her figure fade into the distance. He stood there for a long moment, feeling a sense of anticipation and curiosity that he hadn't felt in years. Something had shifted in the rhythm of his life. He didn't yet know what it would bring, but he was willing to see where it led. The sky darkened unexpectedly in the late afternoon. Clouds rolled in from the west, heavy and gray, blotting out the sun. Jake had seen storms like this before. They came quickly in the valley, and he knew better than to ignore them. He tightened his jacket, glanced at Dusty, and muttered, "Looks like we're in for one." Maria, who was helping him gather some hay near the barn, looked up at the clouds. "We should finish up soon," she said calmly, her eyes scanning the sky. "That storm looks serious." Jake nodded. "Yeah, we better get everything secured." He moved quickly, rounding up the last few loose items and guiding the cattle toward shelter. Maria followed, moving with ease and confidence. She was strong, quick, and unafraid of the sudden wind that had begun to pick up. Jake noticed it immediately. Most people would have panicked or complained, but Maria moved with determination and focus. As the first drops of rain fell, Jake called, "Let's get inside the barn, quick." He led the way, with Maria close behind. They reached the barn just as the storm hit full force. Rain pounded the roof, wind howled through the gaps, and Dusty whinnied nervously. Jake closed the barn doors and looked at Maria. "Well, looks like we're stuck here for a while," he said, trying to keep his tone casual. Maria laughed softly, shaking the rain from her jacket. "Seems like it. At least it's dry inside." The barn smelled of hay and earth, a comforting, familiar scent for Jake. Normally, he would have handled a storm alone, moving methodically through chores to keep everything safe. But having Maria here changed things. Her calm presence was reassuring, yet it also made his heart beat faster in ways he didn't like admitting. They worked together quickly to secure the animals. Dusty was calmed with gentle words and a soft pat, and the smaller livestock were moved to safer corners. Maria's hands moved confidently, but she was careful not to overstep, giving Jake space while still being helpful. Jake noticed how her movements were precise, deliberate, and full of care. He felt a mix of admiration and something deeper he didn't quite understand. Once the animals were safe, they both paused to catch their breath. Rain pelted the roof, and the wind shook the barn's walls. Outside, the storm raged, but inside there was a strange sense of calm. Jake and Maria stood a few feet apart, glancing at each other with a mix of curiosity and unspoken tension. "You handle storms well," Maria said, her voice calm despite the noise outside. Jake shrugged. "I've had my share. You get used to them." He avoided her eyes for a moment, but he felt her gaze and the warmth behind it. There was a quiet intensity in the way she looked at him, and he realized he couldn't look away. "Seems like life here keeps you busy," Maria continued softly, "and not just with the ranch. You've got a rhythm, work, care, responsibility, but you carry it with strength." Jake's throat tightened. He wasn't used to people noticing the effort he put into his life. Most saw the results, but few recognized the struggles, the constant balancing of work and solitude. Her words struck a chord, making him feel understood in a way that startled him. They moved closer to an old wooden bench, sitting across from each other as the storm's rhythm filled the silence. The sound of rain, the wind, and the distant rumble of thunder became a strange kind of music, accompanying their quiet conversation. "Do you ever get lonely?" Maria asked suddenly, her tone gentle but curious. Jake looked away, staring at the wet ground. "Sometimes," he admitted after a pause, "but I've learned to manage. Solitude, it's not always a bad thing." Maria nodded. "I understand. Sometimes being alone gives clarity, but sometimes it can be heavy. Loneliness isn't just about being alone, it's about wanting connection but not knowing how to reach it." Jake felt a lump form in his throat. Her words resonated in ways he hadn't expected. He realized that in all his years of isolation, he had kept people at a distance, afraid of getting too close, afraid of relying on anyone. Yet here was someone who didn't demand, didn't push, but simply spoke truth, offering understanding and insight. They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the storm. The barn creaked, the rain hammered down, and Dusty shifted in the corner, sensing their emotions. Jake finally spoke, his voice softer than usual. "I've never met anyone like you. You see things differently. You notice the little things, makes me think differently too." Maria smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "We notice what matters, don't we? The world can be loud, busy, distracting. But sometimes you notice the right things. That's all I do, I notice." Jake looked at her, really looked, and for the first time he didn't feel the need to hide. He could feel the pull between them, the curiosity, the admiration, and something deeper. He wanted to reach out, to connect, but he wasn't sure if it was the right time or the right way. The storm continued, relentless, shaking the barn and sending occasional splashes of water through the cracks. Maria's presence made Jake feel both calm and alert. She was strong, capable, and yet her quiet vulnerability drew him in. He realized he wanted to protect her, care for her, and somehow be a part of her life without losing himself. Finally, Maria spoke, breaking the tension. "I didn't expect to be caught in a storm today," she said lightly, though her eyes held a deeper meaning. "But I'm glad I'm here with you." Jake swallowed, feeling the words resonate in his chest. "Yeah," he said quietly, "me too." For a while they simply sat there, listening to the storm, letting the moment stretch. The sound of rain, the smell of wet hay, and the distant thunder created a cocoon around them. The storm outside was fierce, but inside there was a growing connection, an unspoken understanding that something meaningful was happening. At one point, Maria reached out to calm Dusty, her hand brushing Jake's as she guided the horse. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through him. He realized he hadn't felt this way with anyone in years. The storm outside mirrored the storm of emotions building between them, unpredictable, intense, and cleansing. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," Jake said finally, his voice low and thoughtful. I don't know why, but I feel lighter somehow. Even though the storm's raging outside, I feel calmer with you here." Maria met his gaze, her eyes soft and steady. "Maybe it's not the storm outside, but the one inside us," she said quietly. "Sometimes it takes a storm to see clearly, to feel what's really important." Jake nodded slowly. He realized she was right. The storm had forced them together, stripped away distractions, and allowed them to be honest with themselves and each other. He felt a strange sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted. As the rain began to lighten and the wind softened, Jake and Maria worked together to secure the last of the equipment and make the barn safe. Their movements were synchronized, comfortable, and unspoken communication flowed between them. By the time the storm passed completely, the barn was secure and the animals were calm. They stood outside, watching the last clouds drift away, revealing a sky painted with streaks of orange and pink from the setting sun. The air smelled fresh, clean, and alive. Jake looked at Maria, feeling a pull he could no longer ignore. I'm glad you were here today," he said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. Maria smiled, warmth in her eyes. "Me too," she said softly. "It wasn't just about the storm. It was this, being here with you." Jake's chest tightened. He wanted to say more, to express the pull he felt toward her, but words failed him. Instead, he simply nodded, letting the silence speak, knowing that the bond between them had deepened in ways that could not be easily undone. As they walked back toward the barn together, Dusty trotting happily alongside, Jake felt a strange mixture of anticipation and curiosity. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing clearly. He wanted Maria in his life, wanted to see where this connection could go, and was willing, for the first time in years, to let someone into his carefully guarded world. The storm had come and gone, but it had left something lasting behind, a connection, a spark, and the quiet realization that life could be shared without losing oneself. Jake felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: hope. And Maria, walking beside him, felt it too. After the storm had passed, the ranch felt different, clean, fresh, and alive. The air smelled of wet earth, and the fields glistened under the morning sun. Jake walked along the fence line, Dusty following closely, but his mind wasn't on the work. He couldn't stop thinking about Maria, about how easily she had blended into his world during the storm, about the way she seemed to understand him without asking for explanations. For the first time in years, he felt a tug in his chest, a mix of excitement and fear. Jake had lived alone for so long that he wasn't sure how to feel about wanting someone by his side. His ranch had been his life, his refuge, his constant. He had built walls, not just around the land, but around himself. He knew he had to make a choice: continue with the familiar solitude or take a chance on something new and uncertain. Maria arrived later that morning, as she had promised. She moved with her usual calm confidence, carrying a basket with some food she had prepared for them. Her presence brought warmth to the ranch, and Jake felt both nervous and glad to see her. "You came back," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. "I said I would," Maria replied with a small smile. "Besides, someone needs to check if the ranch survived the storm completely." Jake allowed himself a small laugh. "It's standing, surprisingly. Dusty didn't even complain much." Maria walked alongside him as they inspected the fields and the barn. She noticed small details: the bent fence post, the muddy ground near the cattle pen, the scattered hay. She offered suggestions gently, never overstepping, always aware of Jake's pride and ownership. "You handle all of this yourself?" she asked, impressed. "Mostly," he said. "It's easier that way, keeps things simple, fewer problems." Maria nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I can see why, but it's a lot for one person. Maybe you don't have to do it all alone." Jake's jaw tightened. The words were simple, but they struck deep. He wasn't used to relying on anyone, and letting someone into his daily life felt risky. He had built his independence like armor, and the idea of sharing his responsibilities, or his life, was terrifying. They moved to the barn, where Maria began arranging the food she had brought. Jake leaned against the doorway, watching her. She worked quietly, methodically, with a calm grace that contrasted with his rough, hurried movements. Watching her, he felt a growing admiration, and something else he couldn't quite name. "You know," Maria said, breaking the silence, "I like seeing people who care. People who take responsibility. You care a lot, Jake. About the land, about the animals, about life." "That's rare." Jake felt a warmth in his chest, but he masked it with a shrug. "I've done what I had to, doesn't make me special." Maria looked at him, her eyes steady. "It does, though. You don't take things for granted. You notice what matters. You put heart into your life. That counts for a lot." He glanced at her, feeling the weight of her words. She wasn't flattery. She was speaking truth, and it made him realize just how lonely he had been, how much he had avoided letting anyone in. Maria wasn't asking for anything, she was offering understanding, and it terrified him. After a moment, Jake said quietly, "I don't usually let people in. It's not easy for me." Maria nodded, her expression softening. "I'm not asking you to rush. I just want to be honest about how I feel. I enjoy being here with you. I like helping, talking, even just being around. And I hope that's okay." Jake swallowed hard. Her honesty, her patience, her confidence, it was overwhelming. He wanted to say yes, wanted to tell her she could be here, wanted to admit that he felt the same pull. But he hesitated, unsure if he was ready to change his life, unsure if he could share the ranch, the work, the solitude he had cherished for so long. "Maria," he said finally, I like having you here too, but I'm not sure how this works. I've lived alone for years. I don't know if I'm ready for someone else in my life, not fully." Maria smiled gently. "I understand. You don't have to be ready all at once. We can take it slow. I'm not here to change you or take over your life. I just want to be a part of it if you let me." Her words eased something inside Jake. He realized that she wasn't trying to push him. She was patient, respectful, and willing to meet him where he was. And that made him want to try. They spent the afternoon repairing a section of fence that had been weakened by the storm. Their movements were synchronized, working without needing to speak much. Occasionally, their hands brushed as they carried boards or tied posts, and each time, a spark of warmth ran through Jake. He felt his walls slowly softening, brick by brick. During a short break, they sat on the edge of the pasture, watching Dusty and the other animals move freely. The silence was comfortable this time, filled with unspoken understanding. Jake realized that he had never felt this relaxed with anyone. He could be himself without pretending, without guarding every word or movement. "Jake," Maria said softly, turning to him, "you don't have to decide everything today, but I want you to know I'm not going anywhere. I'm willing to wait as long as you need. I just hope you'll let me in when you're ready." Jake looked at her, the sun highlighting her features. He felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to tell her that he was ready, that he wanted her by his side, but fear held him back. Sharing his life, his ranch, his routines, it felt like opening a door he had kept locked for decades. But as he watched her, calm and patient, a thought struck him. Maybe he didn't have to face life alone anymore. Maybe having someone by his side wouldn't take away from who he was, it might make him stronger. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his own hesitation. "Maria," he said finally, his voice steady but quiet, "I think I want to try. I want to see where this goes." "With you," Maria's eyes lit up with warmth and relief. She reached out, gently taking his hand. "I'm glad," she said softly. "That's all I've wanted." For the first time, Jake felt a real sense of hope. The decision wasn't easy, but it felt right. He realized that partnership didn't mean losing himself. It meant sharing life with someone who understood, respected, and cared for him. Maria wasn't there to change him. She was there to walk beside him, and that made all the difference. They spent the rest of the day together, completing chores and planning for the coming week. Each moment was filled with a quiet intimacy, a sense of trust that grew stronger with every shared task. Jake felt lighter, more at ease, and even found himself laughing more than he had in months. Maria's presence had brought life and energy into the ranch in a way he hadn't expected. As evening fell, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple, reflecting on the fields below. Dusty grazed nearby, content and calm. Jake turned to Maria, feeling a mix of gratitude and anticipation. "You know, I wasn't sure about letting anyone in, but now I'm glad you came." "I'm glad you stayed," Maria smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "Me too, Jake, me too." In that quiet moment, with the ranch bathed in the soft glow of sunset, Jake realized something important. Life wasn't meant to be faced alone. It wasn't about walls or distance or fear. It was about connection, understanding, and choosing someone to walk beside you, through storms and calm days alike. And in Maria, he had found that person. The morning sun spilled over the valley, turning the ranch into a golden landscape. Jake stood on the porch, watching Dusty trot across the fields, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known he was missing. Maria joined him, carrying a basket of fresh bread and coffee. She smiled warmly, her presence bringing light to the day in a way that made Jake's chest feel full. "Morning," she said softly, setting the basket down. "Morning," Jake replied, tipping his hat slightly. The simple routine felt comforting now, but it was no longer solitary. Maria's presence made everything feel more alive, more meaningful. He realized that the ranch had always been a part of him, but now it was shared, and sharing made it even more special. They spent the morning tending to the cattle together. Maria's hands moved confidently, gently guiding the animals, while Jake moved beside her, coordinating the herd. Their movements were synchronized, natural, and effortless. They had learned to communicate without words, understanding each other's rhythms and intentions. Each small act, from patting Dusty to checking the fences, strengthened the bond between them. After the work was done, they took a break under the shade of the old oak tree near the barn. Maria handed Jake a cup of coffee, and they sat together, the warm sunlight filtering through the leaves. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with trust and understanding rather than awkwardness or tension. "You know," Maria said thoughtfully, "I was worried at first. I didn't know if you'd let me stay, if you'd let me be a part of your life. But now it feels right. We fit." Jake smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "I was worried too," he admitted. "I didn't know if I could share this place, this life with someone, but having you here, it feels better than I expected, stronger somehow." Maria reached out and took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Life is better when it's shared," she said simply. "Not just the good parts, but the hard parts too, and I want to be here for all of it with you." Jake looked at her, feeling a mix of gratitude and admiration. He had spent years building walls around himself, fearing the vulnerability that came with connection. But Maria had come into his life with patience, understanding, and quiet strength, and she had shown him that opening up didn't mean losing control. It meant finding someone who could walk beside you. Their peaceful morning was interrupted by a small challenge. One of the fences along the northern boundary had been damaged by lingering rainwater, and a few cattle were edging too close to the road. Jake sighed but didn't complain. Together, he and Maria worked quickly to repair the fence and guide the cattle back to safety. Maria's calm presence and careful handling of the animals complemented Jake's experience and strength perfectly. "You make this easier," Jake said quietly as they finished. "Not because it's easy, but because you're here. You know what you're doing and you don't make it feel like work." Maria smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're a team," she said. "That's what partners do, and you make it easy to want to be part of your life." Jake felt his heart tighten at her words. He had never been one for declarations of emotion, but with Maria, it felt natural to express what he felt, even in small ways. Her presence had brought balance and warmth to his world, and he couldn't imagine returning to the life he had before her. The days passed in a rhythm that was new but comforting. Mornings were spent working the ranch, tending to cattle and maintaining fences. Afternoons were quieter, filled with shared meals, stories, and small projects around the property. Evenings were their own, a time to watch the sun set over the hills, talk about their dreams, and simply enjoy each other's company. The ranch had always been alive, but now it had a heartbeat that belonged to both of them. Jake noticed how Maria introduced small elements of her Apache heritage into their daily life. She taught him about traditional planting techniques, shared stories from her family, and even showed him ways to honor the land that he had never considered. Jake listened carefully, fascinated, and incorporated these ideas into his routine. He realized that blending their worlds didn't diminish his own, it enriched it. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by, curious about Maria's presence on the ranch. Jake felt a brief flash of defensiveness, the old protective instincts kicking in, but Maria handled it gracefully. She greeted the neighbor with warmth and respect, explaining that she was helping with ranch work and learning from Jake. The neighbor nodded, impressed by her confidence and composure, and left. Jake realized that having Maria by his side made him feel stronger, not weaker. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake and Maria sat on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. Dusty grazed nearby, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of the valley, birds returning to their nests, a distant stream flowing, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. "I never thought life could feel like this," Jake said quietly. "Calm, full, shared. I thought I'd be alone forever, but now I can't imagine it without you." Maria leaned her head on his shoulder, smiling softly. "You don't have to imagine it, I'm here. We're building it together." Jake wrapped an arm around her, feeling a sense of peace and purpose that he hadn't known before. He realized that life wasn't just about the land or the work, it was about the people who shared it with you. Maria had shown him that love and partnership didn't take away from his independence. They enhanced it, added depth and meaning to each day. In the following weeks, they faced small challenges together: repairs, unpredictable weather, and the occasional tricky cattle situation. But each challenge brought them closer. They learned to communicate without words, anticipate each other's needs, and trust one another completely. The partnership they had formed wasn't just about romance. It was about teamwork, respect, and shared life. One evening, after a long day of work, Jake and Maria sat by the fire pit, roasting corn and enjoying the quiet night. The stars twinkled above, mirrored by the soft glow of firelight on the ranch. Jake looked at Maria, feeling a depth of emotion that went beyond words. "You've changed my life," he said quietly. "Not in a big, dramatic way, but in every little way that matters. You've made this place our place, and I'm grateful for that every day." Maria smiled, reaching out to hold his hand. "And you've given me a place to belong. A life that's honest, hard, and full. That's all I could ever ask for." They sat in silence for a while, letting the quiet of the night speak for them. The ranch was peaceful, the air was cool, and their hearts were full. They had built something real, something lasting, not just love, but life together. As the months went by, Jake and Maria continued to grow as partners. They celebrated small victories on the ranch, shared meals with neighbors, and incorporated traditions from both of their lives into their daily routine. Each day brought challenges, yes, but also joy, laughter, and a deepening bond. The ranch, once a symbol of solitude and independence, had become a home filled with life, warmth, and partnership. Jake no longer said, "This is my ranch," as a claim of ownership alone. Now it was a shared sanctuary, a place where two lives intertwined, where hard work was balanced by love, and where solitude had been replaced with connection. Maria's words from the first day echoed in his mind. "I want you too." And now he could say the same, not just with words but with his actions, his care, and his heart. Together they watched the sun set, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The ranch was alive, their lives were full, and the future, unknown and uncertain, was a journey they were ready to take together. And in that quiet, golden evening, Jake realized that life, shared with the right person, could be stronger, richer, and more beautiful than anything he had ever imagined.